right, so I am currently on the 405 North in Los Angeles on a Monday morning. It is 7:12. The ride was supposed to take an hour. Looks like it's going to take about an hour and a half. We'll see how many more accidents there are. On April 19th, I put out a tweet saying, if you have any questions, want to do a Q&A. Got a bunch of good questions and never had the time to actually answer them. So taking this terrible time in traffic to do some Q&A. First question I got was from Michael Flynn, and he asked about conducting content audits. Says, do you have any tips on conducting content audits? I asked him kind of what he meant by this, and he says, from the UI side of things, I feel like my approach to the workflow on websites with 1,000+ pages needs some improvement. Any tips would be great. I haven't done too many audits like this. Most of the audits that I've done in this kind of a context where there's a lot of depth and variety has been more around how accurate the implementation of the UI is compared to the actual designs that were delivered. I don't have any real sophisticated ways of doing this. I've always taken a lot of screenshots either from the phone or on, in the browser, and then we'll mark them up in Keynote or something very simple like Google Slides. So that's something that's very shareable. This has worked pretty well because you can kind of give a direct reference and then link out to anything that is showing the improvement or what it should be. I can imagine on a page, on a project with like 1,000 pages, there's quite a bit of variety and a lot to organize. And so for that, I think I would suggest trying to break up some sort of themes or general buckets of focus, because you're going to have a lot of work to audit there. If you can do headers, button copy, footers, image galleries, whatever the buckets of UI are, the more that you can componentize those and structure those in certain groups, seems like that'd be the right way to do it. But I haven't been tasked with too much of this kind of auditing work, so sounds like a tall task, Michael, but hopefully you're keeping your head above water with that work. Next question is from a name I can't pronounce. Is at Juan Z, I believe. So he's asking, he imagines I come to incremental ideas for a product. How do I advise testing, if it's really a solution or just a feature? I'm not sure quite what that's asking. I think validation is a big part of my process. There's an idea of features that don't add a lot of value and features that actually solve a problem. And I think that's what you're asking. I think you have to do this with actual data or with actual feedback from an ideal user. This is hard and you have to do very specifically. And what I mean by that is it's very easy to put a lot of different variables in a certain design solution, and any of those variables will give specific or not very specific feedback from a user. So when you're trying to validate an idea or a solution to a specific problem, I've learned that you need to be very specific in the feedback that you're trying to get and the design solution that's going to get them there. So in any given flow or feature or product or app, there's many things you can do to improve or to solve a problem. When getting feedback, it's very hard to decipher if your solutions did that if you have many variables working. I learned this at Netflix the hard way when we had a lot of things we wanted to improve on an iPad app. I put all of the things I wanted to get in one prototype, and we ran 2 days of qualitative research. We gave it to users for two days, and we got a lot of feedback, but we got no strong sense of what was working well and what wasn't, because they were reacting to every different thing I added in different quantities. If looking back at that, if I would have taken one specific feature that I thought was one of the 4 improvements I wanted to make, we could have tested that against the control, which was what they had on their, what was in production. If you can test those 2 things against each other, you can very quickly say, okay, this is doing well or not. Then you can go to the second thing and say, this is working or this is not. Then you can go to the third thing and say, this is working well and this is not. Then once you know which pieces are working well and which pieces aren't, you can then start to combine those into a heuristic. Then you can assemble all those things into the ideal solution and have confidence that each of those iterations or design solutions are actually solving the problem or getting the response or the activity or the interaction that you're looking for. Hope that makes sense. And once again, sorry for butchering your name. Okay, Pham says, currently working on my portfolio, how much context is too little or too much text or of process versus wireframes versus visuals? I struggled with this actually a lot in getting my portfolio ready for this round of interviews and me being on the job market again. I reviewed a ton of portfolios at Design Inc. Every week, thousands of them. And for me, the context, specifically with like UX and product design, is huge. It's really easy to show hero screens of an app or even a flow of an app, but without the context of, what the app looked like when you came into it, if it wasn't a brand new app, or if it is a brand new app, what the problem you're trying to solve is, it's really hard to evaluate the success of the design. If you're following common UI patterns from like iOS or Android, it's really hard to understand if the designs you came to were appropriate for the problem. And so I think I appreciate, obviously, some nice hero shots of what the final product was, but this would be like one or two of those. I don't care if it's on a floating phone or on like a flat surface or just a screen itself. Like those things are like dribblifications that make the presentation look nicer, but really all I care about is the design. But I only need like one or two of those. Everything else should be not a lot of words. I'd say like a paragraph or two for each like section or phase or idea of the project. And then I like to see a lot of the process. I like to see where you started and how you iterated before you came to the final solution. I like to also see some of the brainstorming, whiteboarding if it's like understandable. I don't think like whiteboard shots for whiteboard shots are important. I think it's like if you can speak to what's in the whiteboard, that's helpful. And then like a lot of from product level, a lot of the like flow stuff really helps me know that you're thinking about the whole product itself. And so that's always good to look at. Also, I think it's important, a lot of the projects that I shared, what we wanted to build and what got built wasn't the same. Like often there's iteration and a team and complexity there. And so I, in my portfolio, talked to like the challenges and the things I wasn't happy with, some of the complications or some of the compromises. And I think that's important too, because that's like real life. If you paint this perfect picture of the perfect design, for me, that's almost a trigger of like, well, how did that actually happen? Is this a real project? Is this honest? So I think it's a good blend of both, but I lean more on the process side. And that's specifically for my context of like product and app design, UX design. If you're a visual designer, obviously you're going to have a lot more images and visuals. But even then still, if you're showing a design system or a UI language or a graphic interface for a brand, having some of the thought process and strategy and design principles behind those things, it just shows that your design is more sophisticated. And if you don't have those, you should be thinking about those types of things because it is a lot more than just like pixels and rectangles and like the end result design. Okay, this is from Henning BRR. I'd like to know how you handle project management from start to finish. For the majority of my work, project management hasn't been done by me. There is an actual project manager on the team. And this is like, I'm talking like in the context of Netflix, Google, even the startup, our CTO and co-founder, Bjorn, was kind of the project manager, making sure that everything was running on time. I've worked on a lot of small side projects with like one developer with smaller teams. Because I'm very product minded, I've done some of the management of those things. I don't have any specific strategies or sophisticated tools or workflow. A lot of it comes down to what do we want to ship when and what's essential and what can we cut. So that ends up being a spreadsheet of like features and tasks and things we want to complete with like end dates for like design and then like ship dates and testing dates for engineering. That can become very like cumbersome and hard to maintain. But if it's a small team, that's essentially what I've done in the past. And then having like a running document in Google Docs of like PRD, product requirements document, like just everything that we want to do. And every time we meet once a week, we update that document and say like what the priorities are. There's a lot of bug software out there. I have a hard time using a lot of them for design because they're so engineering based on like micro tasks that it's really hard to say design navigation. That iterates a lot. And so a lot of, I feel, design tasks are less tactical. They're tactical, but they're not so like, I did it and it's done and then it's done forever. Like usually those things iterate. A lot of parts of the design are like interconnected, so it's not like I just finished this and then I moved to this piece and I finished that and then I moved to this piece and finished that. There's a lot that moves around in design, and so we use Jira at Design Inc. I've worked with Trello on a lot of smaller teams. Google had a team called Buganizer, which was the same thing. You set a priority and a title and a description and what does it block and who's it assigned to. All these tools are a lot of project managers and engineering teams use to like track of the specific tasks. But for me, most of the time, like a spreadsheet and some sort of note documentation works. And then it's really up to the team to communicate. Once the teams get bigger, you usually have a project manager. So I don't think designers should be doing too much project management to that question specifically. All right, from Yoel, my name with a Y, Yoel J Gonzalez. Should designers get degrees to land jobs? I think it definitely helps. I don't know if I would have got my jobs at Netflix and Google without a degree. Do I think they're necessary to be a qualified designer to get those jobs? No. Does it definitely help in jumping through the hoops of getting a job? Absolutely. If you don't want to get a degree or go to college, you better have a lot of real work and side projects and stuff that you've built. It's almost impossible to get a job without a degree and a fake portfolio. So if you're not going to go get a degree, you better be like hustling on the side, building things, and walk in with 4 or 5 solid projects. Or like, this is what I did with the team or with a freelancer or with my friend, and show that. All that being said, I think the most valuable part of design school and having a degree is the solid amount of time in that age of life to like figure out what you're passionate about, to try lots of things. I think it's more self-discovery and finding, what makes you tick more than it is about learning about design, because you can learn about design lots of ways. The second biggest thing about design school that I appreciate and think is important is the actual process of like design critique and learning how to talk about your work. Most work coming out of college is going to be pretty bad. Mine was terrible. I think going through design critiques and pitching your work at design critiques, that's a huge part of the creative process, if not one of the most important parts of the creative process. Designing something good, but then also being able to sell it to your boss or your project manager or your VP or your client, or the CEO, whoever it is. That for me is a huge part of design school that you don't get as a freelancer. You don't get not going to school. So I'm pro education, even though there's a lot of downsides financially to it. All right, this is from UXdesignMBO. How can design drive early stage of product development? What's the process like getting product alignment with PMs to deliverables? This is like a design process question I love because I've been through a lot of different environments, and I feel like the process of bringing Android Auto on the phone, like to market, like to a launch at I/O, from the beginning stages, like for me seemed very design driven, and I enjoyed the process that Android took there. I was under the leadership of my manager, Evan Malahi. You see him on some past vlogs. And his early stages with him working on Android Auto, we had essentially a prototype, like a janky, validating the tech that this was even feasible on a phone, bad prototype, and the old product or the core, like flagship product of Android Auto. And then Android has its own initiatives and brand and needs. And so we entered this project with a lot of starting points, but no direct path. And so we spent probably 3 months very much in the clouds, writing design principles, having product pillars, which kind of guided and saying, we care about this and this and this and this. And if anything else comes into the scenario that contradicts these things, then we won't do it. And so, and we did this not only with design, but we did this with engineering, the senior leadership, and project management. And so from the get-go, we had kind of these guiding rules of what we were going to build and design. And we were able to lead and fuel that conversation alongside with our counterparts. So it was very much a shared ownership and responsibility. And I think that allowed us to say no to a lot of things and say hell yes to a lot of other things because we knew that we had alignment across the team. And I'd say every 4 months, we would come back to these. And anytime we would pitch a new thing or there would be a big iteration or jog on the product, we would say, hey, because of this and this and this, we're moving to this now. And hey, we know this is really hard, but we should invest in this. So we say, hey, we know this is really attractive and shiny, but it contradicts these things and we're compromising here, so we're not going to do it. I feel like that simple document was actually, frankly, a very big poster that's showing like our market landscape and our products and where we sat and what was valuable. I wish I had this stuff to show, but I obviously can't. One of these days, I hope I can like better communicate this somehow. But an early visual and alignment on a document that says this is what we care about and this is the product we want to build and this is why we're designing things this way, I think help a whole hell of a lot. Working in larger organizations and working with other leadership. All right. I was wondering if you could talk about effective design critique and a team environment. Would love to hear more about what went down at Google and Netflix. So effective design critique for me, I forget who asked this question. I'm sorry. I put it in my notes because it came through an email, I believe. Effective design critique for me is essential in a good design culture in any team, whether it's a big tech company or a small agency or an internal agency. One thing that was valuable that both Netflix and Google did was, I think on Android we called them design jams, and Netflix, they had some crazy name for it, but it was a weekly meeting. The entire design team was required to go. It wasn't optional. Everyone had to be there. And, 2 or 3 days before the event, one of the design producers or managers asked for requests of developing work that needed feedback. And it was usually 1 or 2, maybe 3 people that presented depending on the complexity of the work. But in all of those scenarios, there was a format that worked very well where you gave context, like this is the project, this is the state it's in, and this is the feedback I'm looking for. And every review started that way so that the team, everyone there knew that like, hey, this is finished and decided on. I'm working on the visual implementation and need, feedback on whether it's on brand. Like it would be that specific. Or, hey, I just got a new PRD from a PM. We're starting to explore this and it's associated with this part of another product. Here's, my first flows or what I have, here's my idea for the product or how I'm going to do this or this feature. I also want to make sure that I'm going in the right direction. This is very like, we're going to present mocks, next week to management. I want to make sure I'm not off here. I think there's a couple of things that I think are successful in that scenario. One, I think meeting frequently with everyone that needs to be in the room is essential. I think weekly is good if you have a large team. Second, there's like a specific format and things are time boxed. There's like a start time and end time. People know how long they are required to present. And they were presentations. They weren't just like walking through a sketch file or like an Illustrator file. They were like prepared documents so that, the meeting went efficiently. And then I think providing context for feedback. A lot of times you can have a lot of good intent and a lot of great designs and a lot of smart people in the room. But if not everyone's not aligned on why we're talking about something, you can waste a lot of time and get a lot of bad feedback. Like an example is I'm in the final stages of a product. I've been through many meetings with PMs, a lot of engineering, a lot of other, product areas. And like, here's the solution. I just need a couple of things answered. At that point, it's not valuable for anyone to be like, but why are we doing it this way? Why didn't we think about this? Like if we want to re-question the solution, there's a time and a place for that. But at that point in the meeting, the designer has no control to change where they're at. They've already been through many things that have been agreed upon. That's the reason for having the context of what feedback you're looking for. If there is something that's going, I've seen this happen where we're in the final stages of something and someone's like, this is wrong, this is shitty, we can't release with this. In my opinion, the correct thing to do is let's take this offline and address this later because I'm really concerned about where this is going and I think we should rethink it. Not to sideline the entire critique and then push everyone else that was scheduled off. I think that 1 hour was very precious for Android, and we did this at Netflix as well. And I think having some rules around that for the culture is good in making sure that they're worth everyone's time. That's it. Yeah, this is an experiment. First time I'm doing in-car Q&A with the GoPro and the AirPods. If the audio is shitty, I'll probably rig up a different setup. But I like this format. I like talking in the car. I like the Q&A. If you have questions, hit me up on Twitter @_BKLMN. Tweet at me or leave something in the comments. I'm going to be collecting questions and doing this every so often. So ask me anything. Glad to answer. Thanks for watching. Cheers.